All right, guys and gals, I am extremely excited to introduce my guest today. He is not only a guest, he is a longtime friend, although we have not actually met face to face. Anders Leonard has been fencing since he was 13 years old. He's been doing historical fencing since he was 18. He started reading Arma and in the 90s launched his own HEMA club. And for the rest of you, that's a school, a martial arts school in 2003. In 2006, he launched Swordfish, which is kind of the standard for historical European martial arts tournaments. It's kind of the paragon that everything else was measured against. He started St. Mark's in 2012. He launched The Historical Fencer, which is a magazine and online blogger in 2020. He wrote the rules that are the underlying rule set for most of the HEMA tournaments around the world and serve as the basis for the HEMA tournaments in Scandinavia. And he's not just an academic. He, as a competitor, he has taken his studies into the competition arena and proven them, Dijon winning several European and North American competitions, the first place in Swordfish and second in the Nordic League. And his accomplishments would probably be far greater than they even are, were it not for the fact he's very good friends with another amazing goat in the HEMA world.
Don't mention his name.
Don't mention his name, Axel Pedersen. And I'll say this, and then I'll shut up. I was studying for a short period of time with Jake Norwood in Washington, D.C., and I was writing this book, The Chivalric Code, after that, because I felt like HEMA needed to find its Bushido. And Jake was helping me with the book. Jake Norwood was doing some of the proofreading. And when I asked Jake about writing the foreword, and I'm guessing this was about 10 years ago or more, uh, Jake said, you think a lot like Anders Leonard. And he said, I need to connect you with Anders Leonard. He would be the man to write the foreword of this book. And so Jake Norwood connected us. And ever since then, we've stayed in contact, not only as it relates to HEMA, but just as it relates to life. I think I would wrap all this up by saying that his greatest accomplishment is that Anders is a husband and a father with a beautiful family. And I'm just glad to have you on board. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Wow, what a what an introduction. Am I supposed to live up to these kind words now during this podcast? I have to apologize to your viewers first. I just came home from my son's soccer. I'm saying soccer now. It's called football, but yeah, this is an American show. They have his football team has our club has a tournament. So I've just been flipping burgers since this morning, and it's very very hot. And it just ended 30 minutes ago, and I didn't get a ride home, so I just basically ran here. So if I look a bit flustered, and that's why. That's my excuse for that.
I gave a long list of your accomplishments. How old are you? I didn't get that from you. How old are you now?
I tell my son I was born just before Lindisfarne. So what would that be? Like 1,300 years? No, I'm 48. So born in 1975.
Yeah, we're the same age. I was born January of '76, so that's interesting. I want to ask you first off, explain to our listeners what HEMA is, and and second to that, I want you to explain why you decided to devote your life's work to HEMA. So it's a two-part, double-edged question.
Yeah, there's a big question. The last one, the first one is easier, I think. So historical fencing or historical European martial arts is really a um, there are a bunch of fencing treatises and manuscripts dating back from the medieval period and onwards, where fencing masters would write down their arts in fencing and wrestling, on horseback in armor, or unarmored, and all of that with dagger and different types of weapons. And previously, well, for the most part in modern history, they've been treated more like as a curiosity and as an academic subject. They were looked on as books. But then some knuckleheads came up with a brilliant idea that, maybe we should try this out and see how it works and try to understand the arts of it and make it a living tradition again. So it went from an academic subject. It basically, you could say that it has an academic side to it, and that's where it comes from, where we're finding these texts and artwork on historical fencing from the old fencing masters, and then we're transcribing them and translating them, figuring them out, interpreting the sources, because that's often necessary, then training them and competing in those arts. And we're trying to be, I don't know, as I would say, true to the sources is actually not the correct way of describing it. That is one aspect of it, but we're trying to explore these sources. I would say that's a better description of what it is that we're doing, because we don't have a direct connection to the old monsters. We're interpreting what they're saying, so we're exploring it. So anyone who's looking for an absolute truth coming from a master won't really find it in historical fencing. You'll find something else, and hopefully something true about yourself and about the fencing arts as well.
It's one of the beautiful things about HEMA is in other martial arts forms, you have so many proclaiming themselves to be masters, while in the HEMA world, everyone shuns the term. And I certainly think that guys like you and Axel and Jake Norwood, if anyone has earned those titles so far, it would be gentlemen such as yourself. Why come into a valley of dry bones like this and breathe life into it? Like, why? I mean, this is a big undertaking. Why have you taken this on and devoted your life to it?
Okay, so the funny answer to that is to get to meet girls.
How's that worked out for you?
Yeah, not that great. Mia doesn't do any fencing. No, it's actually sort of true, because when I was 13 or so, I watched The Princess Bride, and me and my friend were like, "That is fantastic! What a great movie that is!" And we went to like a sport fencing club to do. And we were nerds. We were reading Tolkien and fantasy and playing role playing games and all of that. But I always had that sort of drive and desire of well, there is that, longing for the sword as an and having the knight and the warrior and all of that as sort of an archetype to that's very attractive. And all kids, I fence with my son, and these archetypes, they connect immediately to people, as long as they have their inner child sort of left, I think. So that was the sort of the path that led me into fencing. And then I think that, I mean, like I said, it's an exploration. So then it grew from there. You go through different phases, I think, during that exploration, and that's it. I think it's actually, a lot of people answer the question because swords are cool,
Yeah.
and I think it could be, said to be that's the case as well.
Yeah. So that while that's true, there's various sword cultures around the world, and a lot of them are a lot more popular than the HEMA culture. So, was there an aspect of this that, because of your heritage, because of your Scandinavian heritage, Northern European heritage, that attracted you to this sword discipline more than others?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's the case. I think actually the knightly the knightly ideal and the European heritage of sword fighting and fencing and chivalric ideals are like they're so powerful that they are actually spreading. They've formed a very powerful image that sort of resonates with people around the world, and I think now we're seeing people of all cultures looking into the Western side of things, and so that's a very attractive ideal, I think. But I also had my Japanese period when I trained jiu-jitsu because it was too long for me to travel to the fencing club, so I actually stopped doing Olympic fencing during my teens, and I did jiu-jitsu instead. And I had like one of those rice paper lamps, and I had all that stuff. But yeah, to answer your question as well, that the European heritage was always very strong and on a sort of emotional level. And I think that the fantasy culture is, reading fantasy books and playing role playing games. All of that sort of uh, comes from that. I think that sort of archetypical image of that period and the medieval period, of course, and the sword.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah, the Japanese martial culture is very intoxicating to people around the world.
yeah,
I had my start at. I have pictures of me as a blue belt at 9 years old in Wado-ryu, which is a Japanese form of martial arts. It's probably the closest to kickboxing that the Japanese came to. Very simplistic, when you compare it to Taekwondo and things like that. But um, why do you think, and you touched on this before, HEMA has been a codified martial art form in written form longer than these other very popular, martial art forms around the world? Why do you think that it fell into disuse? I think I know what your answer is going to be to that, and why. It's a two-part question. Why do you think it fell out of favor, and why do you think it's falling back into favor now?
yeah. Okay, so I just have to say, you mentioned Jake Norwood before, and he actually gave me the Hagakure uh, book. So I owe him a debt of gratitude for that one. Is a That's a sort of a Japanese martial ethos book and honor and all of that sort of chivalric values of the 17th century. I think it's 17th century Japan. But uh, I mean, it didn't really fall out of favor. It evolved and it changed and it lost its meaning in modern societies. But I mean, it never. Thing is that it never really died out. We often say things like sport fencing is diluted and everything, but it also actually contains a lot of the aesthetics and the values and things like that. It's a sportified thing because that's sort of the natural evolution of when things fall out of favor. Uh, but I mean, there's no practical use in modern, Scandinavian societies. Been very civilized for a
In
long
the
time.
end, there can be only one. There is a.
Yeah. So I think that's sort of the practical answer to it. But the other the of why the treatises they evolved and they moved on, like the longsword fell out of favor because the rapier, and that had to do with historical shifts and the necessities of that period, and then guns and all of that. But in terms of ideals, it never fell out of favor. Like, if all through history we have statues and paintings and books of these arts, of even if the authors and whoever, sculptors and painters didn't know about these arts and how they were performed, they still remained a very vivid image of our culture. So to them. So they've always been there. And of course, there's a just large discrepancy between sport fencing and whatever. But I mean, the martial culture of Europe is fantastically strong. We just, you know, stopped calling it martial culture, and we called it boxing, and we called it
Hmm.
savat, and we called it sport fencing or wrestling or whatever. So there's a or the American jiu-jitsu, which is shooting guns, right?
Yeah. Just to further illustrate your point, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Marine Corps K-bar, but
Yeah, it's a knife, right?
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
it's a fighting knife, and it is a fighting style within the Marine Corps.
yeah. Mm.
And I've got sons, one who's just finished up his tour in the Marine Corps, another that's in right now, and I've got a third son who's a junior in high school that plans to sign up next year to join the Marine Corps. And
Oh,
I wanted to teach my sons the K bar. So I started looking around for a book, that I could use just, as a structured form of teaching them K bar fighting before they went in. And it didn't exist. And there is one K-bar book, and it's not even written by someone who served in the Marine Corps. It's just someone who saw this niche needed to be filled and kind of threw something to. Well, I don't want to. I haven't read it, so I don't want to be too critical. But from what I read, it didn't really seem to be rooted in the actual Marine Corps martial art of fighting with the K bar. And I think this just kind of illustrates your point. These martial art forms, the dagger, it just evolved in the martial world, and this has been passed down to us. I mean, the K bar has been in use as long as for 150 years in the Marine Corps, and where that knife fighting style originated in the Marine Corps probably traces its roots to the European, dagger fighting styles, but it's not a written tradition. It's an oral tradition that's handed down from martial combatant to martial combatant. And hey, maybe that's a book that I need to write. But um,
yeah, you should.
but there's definitely that evolution that takes place. And of course, to your point, you can't just walk around. Maybe you could walk around with swords in this modern day. I think actually in many cities and states in the U.S., you'd probably be easier to walk around with a sword at this point than to walk around with a firearm.
Mm.
But how do you feel? I had a podcast, a couple podcasts back, with Bishop Hayes, where we talked about the quest for truth. And this is one thing that I've noticed about you. And some people just seem to be more intellectually honest. And what I mean by that is they're more willing to say, no, my allegiance is just to truth. My allegiance is just to facts, and wherever those facts, wherever those truths take me, that's where I'm going to go. And I've seen that in your life, in personal conversations. I've seen over the years, and you've shared with me how over the years you have shifted in many regards in issues of your cultural heritage and issues of faith, how you've allowed the evidence to take you wherever it goes rather than holding on to a certain set of preconceived notions and ideals. So I guess to tie that to HEMA, I want to ask you, how has HEMA informed or shaped your view of Western culture, Scandinavian culture, politics, faith? Like, how has HEMA fueled those changes in your life? And if you want to dive into that, that's a big
Oh,
one.
yeah, that's a big question. Oh, I don't even know where to begin. The funny thing is that I actually asked Mia the other day what she thinks is important when you're exchanging ideas, because you know me, I sometimes clash with people
No,
online in debates and whatever,
no.
and she said, well, it's very important that you listen, Anders. uh, and I said, yeah, but isn't there something which is more important than listening? And she said, no. And of course, she's right. Like listening, and there's this whole, how you discuss things. If you can you recite what the other person is actually saying before you argue the
Hmm.
try to argue their point, that sort of stuff. But I said, well, isn't truth even more important? I mean, why should I listen to someone who's not even interested in the truth? Like, why would I even take into account your opinion? Like, if I don't believe that the Earth is flat, and if you tell me that the Earth is flat, you've got a pretty big, uh, you need to convince me very well. But it's also like I don't think that your opinion is as valid as someone who's maybe been in an airplane and seen that the Earth isn't flat. So those kind of things are like, I think that there's something there, and maybe uh, there's a level of personality that goes into people who value truth maybe higher than being comfortable in their own lives. But I would say that there's merit to listening, because it's a sign that you're not full of yourself, and that you actually need to. So it's a two-part thing. Like, I'm not trying to say, well, you shouldn't listen to people. You should, but the other thing is truth as a higher ideal. And the way that how fencing has like, I don't even know where to begin on that, Jonathan. Okay, so yeah, I'd say this. I was you because you mentioned faith, and in terms of searching for truth, I had an experience, and which was a religious experience. But as most religious experiences are, or go, I could easily rationalize that experience. But I realized uh, that I'd said that, well, if God wants for me to believe, then he should talk to me. He should show me a sign, or whatever, throw me a bone here, kind of thing. And then I realized that it would be dishonest for me to, when he did, say, you know what, um, I'm going to rationalize this away, because I've got my worldview set already, and I don't want it challenged.
Hmm.
And it didn't mean that I became like I've got all the answers. I am now a religious person. But what it meant was that I challenged the way that I was looking at things. So I think and that happened during a fencing experience. That thing where I had that first sort of, well, it wasn't the first, but it was the first time I listened, I guess. And the funny thing was that it had a very Norse um, sort of feel to it, a very pagan feel to it, and that struck me. And this is something that we've talked about before. How do you what is that even? What is faith, and what is religion, and how do you practice faith? And well, and I think I've come to the conclusion that I don't need to explain everything. A lot of it is just practice,
Hmm.
and I come from Swedish Christian background. I grew up with the Swedish church, of course, and that's how For me, the church is a very pleasant place to be in. But sometimes maybe I call God the All Father, you know. But it's the same sort of force, I think. And I know that we're going to talk about chivalry, because that's a big thing for
Yes.
both of us. And I think that it maybe I'm not sure. I'm feeling like I'm not being very clear with my answers here, but I think that may actually sort of hone in on what
Yeah,
it
I think, and it is the next thing on my list of questions that I want to ask you.
means.
But and this is just my personal belief, and you and I have talked about this before. Um, I see it as spokes on a rim of a wheel that all lead to the same place. That if you're willing to follow they're not all in the same place, but they all lead to the same place. I personally. think that the Great Spirit that the Native Americans believed in, and the All Father, and whatever culture or civilization you look at around the world, was the local vision of who this Almighty Being was, and that there are, even it, as someone who has devoted a large part of my life to Scripture, even when you look through Scripture, you have God's chosen people, the Israelites, but then you see these prophets in other countries, in other regions, that come into the stories, right? Balaam's donkey, and the high priest of Medea. You've got these prophets, these spiritual seers of other nations, of other worlds, of other cultures, um, that at one point or another, interface with the Jewish nation. So, yeah, so I think all of those things are spokes of a rim that are to lead us to a universal truth if we're willing to follow it. But I don't want to go too far down that road in this conversation.
Mm.
I think that's pretty awesome that that through your art you saw this. You had this epiphany. I think that's pretty awesome. I think probably my first epiphany came in nature, being out, in creation, and it was actually an interaction I had with a wolf, and so it's interesting how God chooses to speak to us, and and the things that we glean from that. So yeah,
Yeah.
you've introduced it. So let's move on, and we have talked about the Bushido, you know, uh, the Japanese warrior ethic, and there is a lot of evidence, and I shared a little bit of it in my book. There's a lot of evidence to show that that was reverse engineered uh, from European sources. And the more I dug into the chivalry of European culture, which obviously European culture has, for most of its history until recently, was a Christian culture, that a lot of the warrior ethos of the European culture, the chivalric code, had its roots in the Davidic ethic, um, of the Old Testament. I actually just did a teaching series on the warrior poet David, and the more I dug into it, I just kept seeing chivalry, chivalry, chivalry everywhere. And the more I studied it, the more I realized, yes, this is absolutely where that Davidic ethic is absolutely where they're drawing this from. Um, do you how do you feel about that? And the other side of that question is um, do you feel that chivalry has a place in modern HEMA, and uh, why do you feel like it's not been embraced more? That kind of thing. Just take your liberty on that topic, if you would.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay. So yeah, it has a great impact on influence on HEMA, and it should have a natural place. And I'll try to, but not just in HEMA, but in people's everyday life, I think. And I'll if you will, I'll try to explain that first, and then we can go back to the historical roots of chivalry and the ideals and how it sort of developed. But because I was politically attacked and canceled and all of that, and there was one thing that taught me of going through that. It's that old saying of trying to, if you debate or if you fight an idiot, they'll drag you down and beat you with experience, right? And what you need to do, and that has a very practical application, is to rise above it. You cannot just separate yourself in this direction. You need to
Hmm.
go higher, and you could use
Yes.
sort of an analogy of music to that. Like if you're playing Handel or Vivaldi or some beautiful piece in a concert hall, and there's in the concert hall, there's a bunch of people just screaming and shouting, and you know the music that you're trying to produce will not really resonate. It will, like, their energy, their vibrance, their what they're doing will destroy the music. Uh, so I'm not sure if the analogy works, but if you need to own that concert hall, you need to clear that out, and then you can start playing. And what will happen is that people will be drawn to it, and they will rise above the squabbling and everything, and it will manifest something different. So that comes in with truth and beauty and all of those things. Like, if you're true to those ideals, which you can then connect to God, saying, like Thomas Aquinas speaks about, perfection. We know that something is better than something else, so then something can be perfect, like completely perfect. And what is that? Well, that is God. That's one of his proofs of God. Uh, so, uh, but it's sort of the same for us in our lives. Any human, like, if you see people who are caught up in drug abuse, if they're like poor social circumstances, or they get into fighting online, and they get canceled like I was, etc. What's happening is that if they have a positive energy, if they have a good vibe, they're
Mm.
playing the nice
Yes.
violins, and they're trying to do that, someone else is trying to drag them down and destroy
Yes.
what they're doing, and they're being like, it becomes sort of this force of good and evil, and you cannot be at the same level. You have to rise above it. You have to say, you know what, here are my ideals. So that's sort of a different approach, I think. Like, people often, when they say chivalry, well, it sounds outdated and everything. And if you try to reduce it to, well, this is a warrior culture specific for this period, and it means this and that, then of course, yeah, a lot of it is outdated, but it's an eternal truth nonetheless. And what happened during the development of the chivalry as a notion is universal and older. But when the Roman Empire fell apart, a lot of people have the notion that Europeans forgot about the Roman Empire. That's not true. They were looking back and saying that we missed something. We something got destroyed. We tried. That's the whole thing with Charlemagne and the Carolingian Empire and all of that. And as that sort of crumbled, Europe became a very violent place, and there was a need for a warrior class.
Hmm.
And but warrior classes and violence are destructive by nature.
Hmm.
So how do they play the violin in the concert hall? Well, they need to play to a higher note, and that's where chivalry comes in. That's saying to them, this is the music that we're playing. And were they perfect? Of course they weren't. Are we perfect? No, we're not, because we're humans. We're not God. We're striving for something better.
Hmm.
And I think that's where that sort of comes in. So that's the sort of the flaky hippie answer to energies and music and
The, to your first point about rising above it, it is a noble philosophy, but I use a very crass Southern American uh, metaphor to remind me of it quite often when I come under attack for speaking out on things that I'm passionate about. Whenever I'm getting roasted or whatever on social media, I just remind myself. You know what a raccoon is? A coon. We call
uh,
it a coon in the South, and we say a good coonhound can whoop a skunk, but a smart coonhound knows it's not worth the trouble.
yeah, that's perfectly that.
And so I remind myself of that all the time. It's like, don't don't lower yourself to start slinging mud. Don't engage in this. Just rise above it. Just brush it off. Just move on. And yeah, that's definitely definitely something that's helped me out quite a bit.
Yeah. And what you do is that what I do, what you do, it's what I do, and what I think is very valuable is to speak about it in terms of norms. So if we're talking about fencing culture, it's a long tradition, and it's the Victorian fencing culture is different from the medieval fencing culture, and it's different from what we have today, but it still has norms, and those norms, for example, they in your new concert hall where you're playing that music and you're letting that music resonate, you set up norms, and those norms are how to behave, how to treat other people, and how you are as a leader as well. Like I think that one of the most important things that we rarely talk about when it comes to leadership is that you should have a quite positive view on your fellow man. Like you need to be able to see the light and wish other people well. There's like those people who attack you, you're not going to wish them well, of course, like, but the people around you who are in your circle, that you care for them, that you serve them as even as a leader, that's your role. So you're not trying to become this hierarchical, the patriarch, the father figure is a loving character who's there to serve, but can sometimes be strict in order to keep that music in that room. So that's norms, and so that's another thing of talking about this. There's a lot of criticism of norms. Like those people will talk about the white male norm, but what that only says is that they want the thing that you've created as a leader, and they want to dismiss you based on the color of your skin, or
Mhm.
and it doesn't really matter if, or that you're a man, and it doesn't really matter if you haven't excluded anyone else. It's
Right.
just a way of attacking you.
Right.
So they it's often quite mischievous, like how do you say, deceptive in how they attack you. So it's easy to get dragged in, and you have to keep that mind to just strive higher for those ideals.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so that was the first part of your question there regarding those things, and how it I think it doesn't matter what walk of life you're doing. Like there's something to learn from that, fight between chaos and that beautiful Vivaldi concert or whatever, and good and evil, whatever you want to call it. But there's um, it's there's something there. The other thing was that Davidic. I can't really answer to that, the origin of chivalry in that regard, but I would say that. So we've talked about Saint Augustine, which he's love his work, his meditations or confessions, and there's I mentioned this in a chat in a chat with you, where there's something like the Middle East, the areas in the Middle East where Jesus lived out his life, they were thoroughly Hellenized during that period in
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And there's a lot to be said that Jesus, if like depending on how you view him, of course, but there those teachings sort of resonate with some Greek philosophies regarding asceticism and stuff like that. That the world, you shouldn't be a materialist. You should, So maybe it could be that there's this. That can also be just how his words were interpreted, how he was interpreted in that time. They were how they were written down, etc. But I think that there was a lot of those learnings that went back and forth in that time. It speaks to what you said before, that a lot of these, truths, they emerge, they pop up in different cultures and take different forms, but they're really the same story. Uh, and the other thing is that when Saint Augustine, he was a Manichaean, he was a pagan. He was born in northern Africa. His mother was a Christian woman, and he studied in Carthage. And when he describes in his confessions, it's pretty fun. I love that stuff, because he describes him as a kid. They're stealing fruits for the love of doing mischief. I did that. You know, we also, stole apples in the gardens and stuff like that. But and then but so he was a learned Roman, and I think that for the Romans, when the Christian ideas came to Rome, they basically thought that these were unsophisticated thoughts. That's like they because the classical world, they had this academic, you know, all of our rational worldview sort of can find its roots back to the Romans and Greeks, and here comes this, and it's written in a completely different tradition, but it's what it does have is a lot of passion. And I think that it may be that it's actually feeding back to the Romans always said, well, we used to be great, but now we've degenerated, right? So they're getting fed back their own ideas, maybe from pushing those ideas out
Mhm.
to Palestine and then getting them back. And what the Christians are doing, they have a layer of passion, like, I
Mhm.
don't care if you kill me in the arena, I will stand by my faith. And for Augustine, when the world is crumbling, when he lived, the Roman world was falling apart. You know, the barbarians were literally at the gates, and it's easy to see that how he could have felt that, well, you know what, we've degenerated. We need to find this eternal truth, but also the Roman society being sort of ritualistic. There's probably an English word for this that I'm not finding. Like, it's doing going through the motions of traditions,
Mhm.
but they've lost the meaning. You
Yeah.
know, there's a lot of pomp and whatever, and then you have these sort of ascetic Christians that are coming in, and they're speaking truth to power, and they're ready to die for it, and all of that. But for an intellectual like Augustine and Ambrose and those early church fathers, it's they need to sort of put all of that through a filter as well. So what they do is they take, for example, the ideas of virtues, the cardinal virtues, and they bring that into their teachings, and they're adding the theological virtues to those moral virtues, and they're adding that passion of the Christian early Christians into to shape a new culture of Christianity, which is merging these the
Mhm.
best of those worlds. And then it's picked up again by Aquinas, for example. You know, he's looking at Aristotle and whatever. But this is really how, when we're seeing the knights saying, like, okay, so the cardinal virtues of justice and honor and temperance and all of that you'll find in Jeffrey de Charny's uh, or Raymond Lull's books on chivalry 1,000 years later. Well, why are they talking about, if they had lost the ancient world, why are they talking about the virtues, the cardinal virtues, the same virtues that Aristotle wrote about?
Mhm.
Well, it's because of St. Augustine and Ambrose. The early church fathers, they took the Bible, that theology, and merged it. And when they were talking about a higher truth that they need to aspire to during those very violent years, as you know, Charlemagne's empire crumbled and all of that. Well, they fell back on that.
A lot
Uh,
a lot of the post apostolic fathers, like you're describing, um, a lot of them were Greek philosophers before they became Christians. Many of them continued wearing their Greek philosopher's cloak in their pulpits when they preached Christianity because they saw Christianity as the ultimate culmination of Greek philosophy. Whether that's good or bad could be debated because, to your point, like Augustine in particular, he's looking at Christianity through the lens of a very Gnostic ideology of anything earthly, fleshly, physical is inherently bad. Whereas my faith tradition and the Scandinavian faith tradition says no, 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 no. There's this blending of the natural and the spiritual, and the natural can be just as the physical can be just as divine, and the natural world can be just as divine as the spiritual because it has the same source. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but a historian his name is escaping me right now. He wrote the title of it's really catchy, but there's more to it than the title. He wrote a book called How the Irish Saved Civilization.
Oh, nice.
And basically what it is
He missed the point. This was the Welsh. The Welsh.
right.
Did it.
So so uh, so when Roman Catholicism, and Hadrian's Wall, the whole nine yards, when it came up into the British Isles, there was Christianity already there. The Roman Catholic Church anathematized the Christianity of the Celtic Christianity because it wasn't Catholic, but it held a lot of more what you and I would say, more nature centric ideals than the Catholic Church did. They had church services outside. They baptized in living, moving bodies of water. All of these kinds of things that the Romans just thought was pagan. But anyway, after Catholic after the Roman empire started to collapse and Europe fell into the Dark Ages, according to this author, it was the Celtic monks who, and their monasteries were not celibate. They had families, and families could live in these monasteries. These Celtic monks began to backfill throughout Europe, and were the educators for a lot of the nobles all throughout, from Scandinavia down through Italy. All over Europe, became the educators for the nobilities and helped to save Western culture and help to reestablish it, using some of the things that you're describing. Um, to bring this back to the Davidic ethic and the knightly chivalric code, I just wanted to give you a couple examples from the Old Testament. Uh, David, King Saul falls out of favor. So David, this little shepherd boy, gets anointed king of Israel. And although he's anointed king of Israel and the current king is trying to kill him, he refuses, because of honor, he refuses to oust the current king. Um, the current king, Saul, is sending out armies to kill him. He's out on campaigns to find him. And just by, like you said, just by virtue of raising himself above the fray, David starts to amass all of these followers to him, because he is not, being petty and lowering himself. At one point, I think King Saul is taking a dump in a cave, and David knows the caves really well and slips up behind him and cuts a piece off of his garment. And then the next day shows him the piece of the garment and says, I could have killed you and I didn't kill you. And then later he even repented for cutting a piece of his garment off. That was his standard. That's where he
Yeah.
thought. And David's son Jonathan, I mean King Saul's son Jonathan and David made a blood covenant with each other, and it was common practice back then that when someone new became king, they would kill off the descendants of the past king. But David wouldn't kill any of Jonathan's lineage because he had made a blood covenant with him. Even though Jonathan's sons were the descendants of King Saul and could have challenged David's kingship, he refused to kill them because he had made a blood covenant with Jonathan, Prince Jonathan, and so he held to that covenant. And Jonathan's son, he brought Jonathan's son into the palace, into his house, had him sit at the king's table, because he made this promise, because he made this covenant. So he held himself to the standard
Mm.
that I see echoing through the chivalric code. When we look at the idea of, just because you're stronger doesn't mean that you should have all the power. And we see it in our culture all the time. The elders, they get older. Just because the young people are younger, more vibrant, and more virile doesn't mean they should be running the show. They have to show honor and respect to the
Mhm.
elders and women. Men are obviously physically stronger than women. And it is our job to keep that in mind and to make them feel safe around us, make them feel protected around us, not to feel threatened. And all of these things I see, because in a strictly secular culture, it's power, it's power that rules. And so there has to be this code, especially with warriors, especially with people who study martial skills. There has to be a code that says, I hold myself, to a higher standard. I live in an area where the average height of men, I'm not a very tall man, I'm 6 foot tall, but the average height of men is about 4 or 5 inches shorter than me. And they're notorious in this region. It's a French Acadian region. They're notorious for having very bad tempers. And every once in a while, this has happened a couple times. I'm thinking in my head right now over the last few years, someone will get really angry and they're swearing at me, and you see their face start to turn red. And for me, because of my experience, I know when someone gets that angry, they've already lost a fight. Right.
Yeah.
They've already lost this fight. If your blood is turning red, if your eyes are watering, if you're shaking, you've already lost this fight. And so to know that and to look at that person and to smile and then just bring it down and say have a good day, and walk away, that kind of thing, that's a warrior ethic that that demands you say, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Uh-huh.
And so I just wanted to share how I see that Davidic ethic tying into the knights saying, okay, I could take this woman's chastity, but there's this higher standard that says I shouldn't. I can take my neighbor's castle, but there's this higher ethic that says I've entered into a contract with him and I have to keep my word. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're right on the target there, because like a lot of people, when you asked me before if the chivalry it's outdated and why it lost its footing in historical fencing, etc., etc., and when you talk to people about that and they say, well, it's outdated, and they look at this, well, this funny or this inconsistency in how they behaved regarding, but in comparison to the idea or whatever, and that's nitpicking, you know, you know, things. So you can read those stories basically in different ways. So you could read the Davidic story where he goes in and he doesn't kill him when he's going to the toilet, which seems like basic human decency, that you just wait a bit, let the man be alone. Sacred. We all know this, you know. Kids, give me just 5 minutes alone. you know. So so we can all relate to that sort of thing. But you can read it like that, like it's a funny story. But you can also sort of look at the bigger picture there and what it's telling us, and just see what does that mean to me? And if you're trying to be very square and you try to reduce history into these sort of academic research, well, I'm super rational about this, and it's all just all squares, and I'm focused like this on the little bits, and so it's rational, but it's also a very reductionist viewpoint on history and stuff like that. So you need to sort of view it from what we can learn from it, because there's wisdom to this. There's actual things that are applicable to our lives today, and that's what we need to be able to see. And if we don't, then we're not wise. We're not smart. We're actually dumb. We're not learning from history. We're not actually, understanding who we are and our role in society and in life. And we're missing the point. I would say.
I, I want to tie this back to something we were talking about earlier. Um, I've seen something interesting in I guess it's been around 10 years that I've been uh, dabbling in the HEMA world. And that is, we are celebrating a European tradition and a European art form, but at the same time, a lot of the practitioners have a detestation a self-loathing of their own heritage and culture.
It's the
Uh,
strangest thing.
isn't it the strangest? Do
One
you
of
have
the
thoughts on that?
one of the things which I think sort of made people, like those people, go and go like, "Hey, he's not with us," was when I posted and I said, "You know what? We don't have a problem with Nazis and fascists in the historical fencing community. We do have a lot of leftists, and and it's fine. You can believe whatever you want. I don't care, because this isn't about politics. This is about fencing. But you also have to accept that we're actually doing something which is naturally conservative. It is something which has roots and meaning, and you can draw ideas from. And it's a celebration. That's actually one of the greatest things about historical fencing. It's that we can apply these knowledges in a practical application, which is the fencing community and the fencing world. And that made them very angry with me. That's, I think, when a lot of them were like, that guy, we're gonna try and get him. And I did the mistake of going into fights with him. You should never do that. You should just like, whatever, and move on.
I,
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you and hold that thought, but Joe Rogan taught me that, actually, of all people, Joe Rogan taught me that lesson. He said, "I say what I want to say, and I never visit the comments." He said,
Oh yeah.
he said, "I never get I never get down in the comments. I just say what I want to say, and I keep moving."
Because it's so toxic, right? And you have to realize that a lot of these people, and because we've spoken about this before. I grew up. I was a very much of a lefty myself. It's the labels are really not interesting, but a lot of the people, I left that movement because I was tired of the people and what they made me into. Because I was sitting there down in that concert hall with all those people shouting, and a lot of them are resentful, they're spiteful, and there's narcissists. Like those people who attacked me, I could point out that guy is a clear cut narcissist. It's all about me, me, me. It's about power for him, and he's just using the words that he's using to you know to win or whatever he's after.
Virtue signaling.
Yeah, they don't matter to him. He doesn't believe that it's about him. And all of those, like, they're toxic people that are just out of tune with themselves, and you cannot fix them. Well, for a lot of them you can't fix them, but you cannot fix those people who actually have the potential for something greater, or by being in an argument with them. All you can do is raise above and play that violin and play that music, and exude that energy,
Mm,
and it will draw the best out of people
yes.
who are attracted to it. And some of them will never know or never learn, but some will. And that's just how you should approach it, I think.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you have to be a stern father in your house and say, the door is shut, you cannot get in, this is here but not further. That's it. Here's the limit. But you don't argue with them.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
That's absolutely right. Um, I was thinking when you were saying that about how the labels don't really matter that much. It's more the philosophy behind them here in the U.S. And I can't speak for where you're at, but here in the U.S., the terms conservative and liberal mean conservative and liberal. They mean nothing anymore. Left and right kind of does, but conservative and liberal. And why do I say they don't mean anything anymore? Most people would consider me a conservative, but I'm not a conservative based on what that phrase meant 50, 60, 70 years ago. And most of the people who claim the label liberal are not a liberal in the way that that term was used 60, 70 years ago. I'm far more liberal in the traditional application of the word than most of the people who claim to be liberal in my country. And I'll give you an example. I may disagree with you, and I think this was your point in your original post there that got so many attacks. I may disagree with you, but I am going to defend. I may disagree with what you're saying, but I'm going to defend to the death your right to say it,
Mm.
because that's true liberalism. Like I believe in free speech to the point to where even if I adamantly disagree with you, I'm not going to try to silence you, because the only thing that suffers from examination and comparison is error.
Mm.
So I'm not trying to silence anyone. I'm not trying to shut anyone out. But we have this thing going on in Western culture where people who consider themselves liberal, they will say we embrace everyone, and we will criticize anyone who voices any dissent, until it comes to things like bad ideas. And I'm just going to say this: there are global world philosophies that are just really bad ideas. And when you point out, let's say, to our left friends that Islam, as a religion, persecutes homosexuals to the point of death, will oppress women, and even see them as chattel, see them as property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then again, we get in trouble for pointing out these truths, and it shows the inconsistency of those that we're speaking with.
Yeah, exactly. I actually had a conversation with a homosexual friend who's from Iran, and it's sort of what's the English word for it now, that your worldview collides with the realities, and you're getting a mixed brain signal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very neat English word for it, but it escapes me now. But you know, that being uh, these people who are sort of pro gay rights, etc., being
Pro
pro
Hamas.
exactly, you know and they're like, yeah, there's no Islamization, there's no, and this guy is like, so can I just interject here? Like, I ran away from these countries because they want to hang me from one of those things. That's like, do I want them here? Do you think that he's positive to that? Like, he's the it's like right now what we're seeing with Jews in Sweden and in many places, I guess. Like, I actually, it's pretty funny because I have a childhood school friend who wrote. She's been on various American, like Fox News and stuff as well, because she raised the flag, warning about that Jews in Malmö are running away from Malmö. They're moving to Israel because they don't feel safe anymore. And a guy that I know, he's married to the sister of um, a Jewish girl, a woman called Pauline Neuding, who's a sort of a conservative debate. I don't know if she's conservative. She's probably conservative, but she talks about politics, and she's also raised that, and all of a sudden now with Hamas and Israel and Gaza, and it's a horrible thing, and it's I mean, it's not an easy thing to sort of take sides in the conflict, because it's about humans at some level as well. I'm not I'm not gonna say that, yeah, it's one side is wrong and the other is right, because it's not that easy. But I would say that it's very strange how these conflicts are portrayed on the political spectrum, left
Yeah.
and right, and how they influence. And the left are pro Hamas. They may, even if Israel has a right wing government, they're still a lot closer to
Yes.
to
Democracy.
to the left wing viewpoint,
Yes.
like Western left wing viewpoints, than what the Palestinians in general are. like even if you're not looking at Hamas, even if you're looking just at the values, if you look at the research from Pew Research about the values in the Middle East and Islamic countries or Muslim countries, etc. Like, how do you even parse that in your brain that this is the side that we're picking? And you can talk about the children and all of that, and sure, you can, and that's a horrible thing. And I sympathize so much with what's happening to the people and all the innocents that get killed. But why don't you care about Yemen? There are like
Right.
many more children killed in Yemen, but it's a conflict with the Saudis
Mhm.
and Iran, and whatever who's ever behind that sort of proxy war. So why does it matter? Well, they've taken a side and they're
Mhm.
sticking to it,
Mhm.
and but it's there's this sort of like, doesn't it click some point? Just go like,
Yeah, you would think it would, and when I look at it, I think, you know, why can't our friends on the left, why can't they understand that, for example, you can be against an ideology and that doesn't make you racist? Because yeah, I tell you what's really racist. What's racist is when you make assumptions about an entire race of people, like all Arabs, for example, are Muslims. That's a racist assumption. I know many Arabs that are not Muslims. When you make generic assumptions about entire classes of people, and so when you look at when you try to explain to them, look, I disagree with this ideology. I don't hate the people, and I'm not opposed to, you know, uh, this group of people or this race of people. I'm opposed to this ideology. And why can't you understand that there's a very big difference in not liking an ideology and not liking a group of people? It's not the same thing. And then you think that, and then you're like, well, I know why, because they haven't thought it through that far. They haven't engaged their mind that much themselves to differentiate between the two.
yeah, it's a classical and it's very basic tribalistic ideas, but it actually goes back to Marx. Marx writes in the Communist Manifesto, is one of the first pages. He says, the history of the world, or the history of mankind, is the history between the oppressed and the oppressor. And he has a few examples and he used the guilds, which is funny because I'm interested in guilds, how they played out. But like between the masters of the guild and the apprentices, they, like, instead of viewing this as a system and trying to analyze why it worked and why that developed into becoming something, he's reducing it to this: no, those were the oppressors and these are the oppressed. And that's how and then you know the left have sort of just picked up on creating this very strange and not very cohesive ideology of men and women. Men are the oppressors, women are white and black and whatever. And it's, now it's like, let's throw in some trans people there and what. It's becoming this sort of mishmash of how do you even keep track of all the who's the most oppressed and all that. And people have been talking about this, but it really becomes a bizarre exercise in mental gymnastics after a while. And but the problem is that it has serious repercussions, of course, like for people. Like, if try to walk through one of the immigrant neighborhoods in Sweden with a kippa. You don't do that. You put your Star of David under your shirt if you're out in town today, if you're in Malmö. And it was actually an Israeli TV program. They sent up some reporters before of the Eurovision contest. I'm not sure if you watched that. Uh,
I've only seen Will Ferrell compete in the Eurovision
all
contest.
right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the Eurovision is a very strange beast, which has degenerated beyond. Like, now it's a fest of I don't know, men wearing
Mm.
very little, scantily clad men wearing very little on stage. Well, women as well, and there's lots of glitter and general debauchery and
Where do I get to watch it? No, okay.
yeah, I wouldn't recommend it,
No.
but there was it's pretty funny because, well, it wasn't funny what happened because they sent some journalists to just walk around with like Star of David and speaking uh, Hebrew,
Yeah.
and they didn't make it far before a
Wow.
man just spat on their face and said, "Why are you spitting at us? Because you're filth." And this is Sweden in 2024.
Yeah.
And the narrative of the left has been that, well, the Jews are threatened by Nazis. Well, what, the 50 Nazis in Sweden are the problem here? Come on, guys. Like,
Yeah.
we got 10% now from the Muslim world of the population. They weren't born here, they were born there. And even the second and third generation are still, having very similar views to a large degree, and that's what's causing the problem. So of course that's sort of the thing that they're missing there. So now they've sided with, it was fine to like be pro-Jewish and against anti-Semites and anti-Semitism. I've had that label thrown at me as well, but it was only an argument as long as
Yeah.
uh, as long as it served their purposes. And now it's the other way around. Like
Yeah, when October, what was it, October 10th, the
seventh, I think. Yeah,
October 7th, the raping, the plundering, the infanticide that took place in Israel. Um, I was, and it's funny, the same left that would have called us anti-Semites, a year ago, were ridiculing me for leading up a pro-Israel rally in my town, to show our support for the local synagogue and for the local Jewish community, to let them know that that we stand with them and we support them during this time. It's amazing not only to see anti-Semitism raise its head almost to the year on the centennial anniversary of when anti-Semitism became a craze in Europe 100 years ago, but to see where it is rearing its head, to
yeah.
see, what segment of our culture is actually propelling this forward. It's pretty shocking.
And they're taking it's the parallel is also so obvious because of what we said before, that it's tribalism, and they're just like, you want to figure out who you were during that time. Well, you could just look at yourself right now. You're following. It's not like, just let's make this clear first. Like, the conflict in itself, it's a beast of its own. Like, we can talk about that. There's a lot of ins and outs and what's happened, and it's basically two groups of people who want the same piece of land, and that's a conflict. And we can look on with horror and try to come up with solutions for that, and we can also find it, compassion within ourselves to see the human suffering on both sides. Just, that's, it's within the capacity of being a human to do that, right?
Mhm.
So that's sort of a beast of its own. But what we're talking about now is the analysis of what the left are doing in terms of their own dogmatic view of, you need to take a knee and, bend your will and recite these words in allegiance to the dogma that we've set. Well, you know what? I can see the witch trials in your eyes. I can
Yeah.
see Stalin. I can see
Yes.
Hitler. I can see you following suit all through history.
Yes.
You're the same people.
Yes.
You're the people that were described by Solzhenitsyn. You are
Yes.
the Cheka after the Russian Revolution. Like, we've seen you. We've seen you before, and you know what? I don't. I it's a very it's a we're not going to accept it. I think that's and it's not about that it's a human sort of thing, right? It's not that I actually condemn all of the people who are now bending a knee. There's actually a way for them out of that as well. but they need to let go of those sort of those ideas and that type of behavior. And it's not an easy path, but I think it's actually possible. But it's a very interesting sort of human psychology
It
thing.
is interesting. Yeah. And to tie this back to a more positive note, and
Yeah, let's do
we'll
that.
start to wrap up with this. As someone who has dedicated himself to a martial art of European culture and your Scandinavian heritage, what gives you hope when you look at the world? You know, when you think of uh, European martial arts, when you think of your Scandinavian heritage, like what gives you hope as you look forward from here?
A lot of things. I mean, there are a lot of dark clouds on the horizon in the world and all of that, and it's easy to focus on that. But I actually sense, like in Sweden, for example, it's a completely different society today than just 10 years ago. As for someone like me, like the things that I said 10 years ago are now being said everywhere, you know. And there's a lot of challenging of the negative things. But I also think that for me personally, I have a club here now, locally where I live, and trying to, create a positive atmosphere that is welcoming, but also follow these ideas. And I can see that it's got a positive impact on people. I can see that there's light here. There's something growing in the hearts of people, and they actually, we're playing the concert in the new concert hall, and people are listening to it. So I think that's very positive, and I actually feel a lot of hope for that. I'm not I'm not despairing even a little bit, because truth and beauty will win out. It's an
Mhm.
eternal struggle, and when the night is as dark and you feel the most despair, it's because it's turning towards the
Yeah.
light. And I think that's going to happen.
Yeah, whether it's politically, culturally, you can't legislate ethics from the top down. You can't legislate morality from the top down. What you have to do is what you're doing: create a space that fosters it, and and from the grassroots, from the foundation up, we change our communities that way. I think that's beautiful. That's awesome. I think you've got a big announcement that's coming this weekend,
Oh
and,
yeah.
and I'd love for you to share it with us here. Breaking news here on the Explorer Show.
Yeah, breaking news. When will this be out?
Dun, dun, dun. I'm gonna have it out by Monday.
Okay, so we'll beat you to it then. But I would have loved to actually have this break news. No,
I'll
we
try to
have.
get it out tonight.
I'm sorry.
I'll try to
You
get
get
it
it
out
out. Yeah. Okay.
tonight.
We have a new glove coming out. It's a Koning glove. We call it the Koning Nobilis edition, and it's a reimagined Koning fencing glove which is lighter, slimmer, more protective, and flexible out of the box. And it's what else? Yeah, it's a great glove.
For the
Comes
people who don't study European martial arts, just let me explain to you that if your fingers get whacked with a long sword, with a fetter, even a blunt one, you're going to have broken fingers without a good glove. And the problem, I've got those clamshells. The problem with gloves is you need the dexterity so that you can use your fingers, and so the gloves have always been a problem. So this is great news.
Yeah, it's a strangest thing when you have a guy weighing 100 kilo whacking you with a steel bar of your fingers. They actually break. It's we didn't think about that.
Yeah, so that's great. And where will that be available?
At www.stmark.se.
All right,
And we'll take pre-orders. So it's a pre-order thing. We don't have. They're very close to production. So, but it'll be a few months before we start sending them out. But we're taking in pre-orders.
that's fantastic. And what about the rest of your work? Your fencing magazine, your blog. Where, if people want to follow you and look into your work, where's the best place to start?
I think, it's that's also a hard question. I mean, we've got the St. Mark YouTube channel where we post things. There's also a newsletter that comes out irregularly. Historicalfencer.com is a good place, but I'm very, because I've got so much with product, development, the club, everything. I've got two businesses. It rarely gets updated, but the Historical Fencer is a good place as well. The HEMA Council Facebook group is a great place to be as well if you're on Facebook. Other than that, just add me on Facebook. I'll accept all friend requests usually. And that's the best way, I think, to
Awesome.
keep track of me.
Well, I want to thank you for giving me this time, and I want to thank your family for sacrificing an hour and a half of your time to me, and
They're
allowing.
suffering on the beach right now. It's 26 degrees. They're fine. They're like, who's that?
Well, thank you for this time. I'm excited to have you on, and I'm looking forward to having you back again. Maybe we could do this every 6 months or so.
That'd be great. I'm up for it. It's
All
been
right.
an absolute pleasure. Always so good to talk to you and
All right.
seeing you face to face like this.
Yes, sir.
It's great.
Yes, sir. And I'm still holding out hope, if not this year, next year, to come and spend a couple weeks camping and training longsword with you and Axel.
That would be fantastic if you make it to Solstinget.
Thank you. And peace be to your house, my friend.
And to yours. Take
Thank you.
care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye bye.